On today's show, we're one day away from opening day, but in honor of the Dylan Cease trade, AJ Preller, has it been a reign of glory? Forever may he reign? Or has it been a reign of terror ever since he took over as the Padres GM, breaking down some of his best, ugliest, in-between trades and what it means for the team going forward. It's going to be a fun one. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Wednesday, March 27th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes occasionally, but surely, certainly, not always the most, Javier Reyes. You may be familiar with my baseball-related work over at Just Baseball, where I am a staff writer, and not only do I write about the Padres, but general baseball, and not only do I write, but I also host a show called Baseball vs. the World, which I think has officially been announced. Hope it has been. If not, oh well, my bad. That's what's coming out soon. But in terms of this show, ladies and gentlemen, you can follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiiipeno, or at LO_Padres, or check out Locked On Padres on YouTube for the cool look of my clean cut, or say hi to Tatis and Pac-Man, or whatever you want. Go check that out. And all of those accounts I just mentioned, if you want to be featured on the Mailbag Monday, leave a comment, DM me, whatever, and you may make an appearance. Today's episode, guys, is going to be a little bit of a fun one. I wanted to just have a little bit of fun. Not that I ever don't, of course, as you all know. But I wanted to have a little bit of fun just going over, we just did Dylan Cease, my kind of breakdown of the negatives for him yesterday on the show. Today, I want to talk in honor of that, in honor of the Dylan Cease trade, breaking down AJ Preller's history. So we got a lot to go into because this man has made a lot of trades. We're going to leave the free agent signings for maybe another episode. If I had one more before opening day, we might go through that. But we're going through trades this time. And it's going to be a lot of fun to just go down memory lane a little bit and see how those trades have aged, because some of them have aged slightly worse. Some of them have aged better. All of the above. It's going to be interesting. But before we do that, guys, I just want to give you one quick nod. Gametime is today's episode sponsor. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON20 for $20 off your first purchase. When it comes to getting all those tickets to events, Gametime's got you covered. Let's begin, ladies and gentlemen, and let's begin with where it all started, which is what I promptly, dutifully call the 2015 disaster class. AJ Preller basically officially taking over and all the moves made around this time. And look, you want to say this wasn't all on Preller? Fine. But even still, let's start from the beginning. And the beginning of AJ Preller's tenure can only be characterized as awful. There's three trades here that are disastrous for the Padres. One of them, which is a nuclear disaster, and the others, which are just like regular bad trades. All right? Since these are actually the outliers, let's talk about the two ones that actually went well, which is Craig Kimbrel and Melvin Upton Jr. in exchange for Carlos Quentin, Cameron Maybin, and Matt Whistler. So Carlos Quentin, shouts to my guy, didn't really do much for the Padres. He just wasn't really moving the needle. And Craig Kimbrel was at least an elite level closer. But after he left the Padres, he just wasn't doing much for the Padres, I should say. How do I explain that? He just wasn't doing much. But Craig Kimbrel was an elite level closer, and at the time had a little bit to offer for the Padres, but just didn't really pan out. And, again, it didn't pan out in terms of winning, I should say. Carlos Quentin did not pan out either. The other player in this trade that's worth mentioning is Cameron Maybin. Cam Maybin, I think, was at times a really important player that could have been helpful for the Padres outfield. They had a really big problem with not really putting together a strong outfield, but he basically only had like one great season, and that was 2011. So this trade was pretty good. Melvin Upton Jr. wasn't great. At the time, he was okay. He was actually really good on those old Rays teams, but he wasn't great. But bottom line is you got Craig Kimbrel. So in a vacuum, not too bad. Not too bad. And then the other one was the trade for Derek Norris and Seth Streich. Derek Norris was okay. You know what I mean? I think that look, Padres fans have seen worse at catcher. Let's just put it that way. But hey, he did have one good season, 3.8 F4 for the Padres in 2015. He was bad after that, but that first year he was okay. He had 14 home runs, played decent defense. Like, he was all right. He was an all right catcher, and he was certainly better than a lot of the catchers that Padres have had lately. And what's hilarious is, if I'm not mistaken, that 3.8 F4 is like the highest by any Padres catcher in a single season. Like, that's the best season, was the 2015 Derek Norris. So that's wild. But when it comes to the disaster class, this is what, in my opinion, is the great epitome of what you get. All the good with AJ Preller, the excitement, the stars, the spending, and all that stuff, the willingness to take a risk, which many teams in the sport are often not able to, here's the downside. All right. Justin Upton and Aaron Northcraft in exchange for Jace Peterson, okay, occasionally useful utility role player, Dustin Peterson, Malik Smith, but then here's the kicker, Max Fried. And Max Fried is a guy who potentially might be a big-time free agent contract guy this coming offseason. So that is a disaster. He was awesome last year before he got hurt. He's been an elite quality pitcher before, helped the Braves win the World Series. His ERA has not exceeded 3.04 since 2019. Just to give you guys a breakdown. And by the way, even in Time's brief appearances in 2017 and 2018, has never had an ERA above 4. 2019 was the only one. It was 4.02. And even that year, he had some better peripherals. So while he isn't like a strikeout superstar, just great control, doesn't give up super hard contact, the guy's good. And he was good almost immediately, by the way, for the Braves. And he was a young guy, so that one's a disaster. Justin Upton, in another world, could this have been a good trade? Maybe, because Justin Upton was actually a pretty decent batter, but he wasn't amazing for the Padres. I know that he randomly stole more bases. If I'm not mistaken, yeah, he stole 19 bags that year, and he hit 26 bombs. Not bad. Not bad. 3.4 win season, that's not bad. He had the potential to go even higher, but that's the problem with Justin Upton, is he always felt like a big potential guy, and Aaron Northcraft was basically nothing. The other guys that they gave up weren't that bad, but the loss of Max Fried was really, really rough and looks worse and worse by the day. And yeah, there's a world in which they're in the offseason this year, and they're saying, hey, let's go get Max Fried. We're all having and laughing about how Jordan Montgomery is still on the market and the Yankees need a pitcher, and people have been like laughing and joking, like, do they just not want to admit their mistake, letting him go for nothing? And then having to sign him for more money, maybe. Maybe that's what happens here with Max Fried. I don't know, but that one ages really horribly, as you all know. But we're not done. Matt Kemp, Tim Federowicz, and Cash. Tim Federowicz. I don't know how to say his name. My apologies. But in exchange for, oh, man, Joe Wieland, which is fine, Yasmani Grandal, and Zach Eflin. For those who are unfamiliar, Zach Eflin is the peak example of the type of pitcher that the Padres really could have used. It took him a little bit of time. I will say that. It took him a lot longer before he got good, right? So we don't know how that shakes up. But even still, this guy ends up being a lot better, especially when the Phillies start charting him out, and then the Rays, and he looks to be hitting his prime right about now, right? So last year, 4.8 F4, for example, that's really good. But you could make the argument that it took him a while to become a genuinely really good pitcher. But even still, like, good depth through a decent amount of innings, those in 2018 and 2019. And then, like I said, this last year with the Rays, did reach his apex and might be a really good contributor for them this year. We'll have to see. But that one doesn't kill quite as much as Grandal. I just mentioned that the Padres really haven't had like a great catcher. I'm hoping that it's Campuzano like for a full season. But Grandal was like an all-star catcher basically immediately after being traded by the Padres. He actually, by the way, was good from the beginning. Right? He was good from the beginning. So you traded in exchange for just Matt Kemp, who I think everyone thought MVP is beyond him, right? In exchange, you gave up a guy who had a 3.8 F4 with the Padres in 60 games. 60 games. They never let him play. Unbelievable player, 144 WRC plus. And then the next year, he played only 28 games. I believe he got a little bit hurt. 1.4 WAR, though, in just 28 games. That's insane, guys. And then the year after that, 2.5 F4 in a larger sample size in 128 games with a 110 WRC plus. Then they trade him 5.2, 5.8, 4.1, 4.6, 5.3, 1.6, 3.6 F4 totals every year. A genuinely all-star caliber catcher for multiple teams, including your division rival, the Dodgers. So that one's a disaster and probably even worse than the Justin Upton one because Matt Kemp, I think, was kind of over the hill at the time. So that was rough. But it's not as rough as the worst trade of that time period. Yeah, by the way, Matt Kemp, 1 F4 for the Padres in 2015. Was quickly traded after that. So, again, disaster class. Wil Myers, Jose Castillo, Ryan Hannigan, and Gerardo Reyes. They gave up Birch Smith, Jake Bowers to Tampa, and then they sent Joe Ross and shortstop Trey Turner, and as well as a player to be named later, to Washington. Joe Ross was not actually that terrible those first 2 years, so he was like a little bit of a cherry on top, like an innings filler. And then obviously Trey Turner becomes a superstar, one of the 10 best players in baseball. So, and by the way, Trey Turner, it didn't take that long. It took him longer to reach the MVP status rather than just being a really solid player who was amazing for fantasy baseball those first few years, right? Like he was just amazing for fantasy baseball. Then he became like a 6-win MVP caliber player, as we all know, and then rejected the Padres contract offer. So Preller even knew that was a mistake. So that was the disaster class of 2015. And ladies and gentlemen, we are still not even close to done. So let's keep it going, and we're going to keep it going with a little bit of positivity that occurred. We're going to show you the other end of that spectrum of AJ Preller that we're going to recap, guys. But before we do that, let me just take a second to talk to you about, what do you think I want you guys to take a guess. What do you think I'm going to be talking about? Go ahead and guess it right now. We're talking about Prize Picks, ladies and gentlemen. And here's the thing. If you think you're out of it, you're never out of it with Prize Picks, because it is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. And part of that is because it's easy. It's easy to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. That's right. 2 to 6, you just which stat you want to go with, and then boom. That's what you do. You don't have to, you're just you versus the system rather than you versus really smart people who know what they're doing necessarily. So it's a nice place to start. And also, if you want to play alongside some celebrities like Meek Mill, Sugar Sean O'Malley, they've got a community plays section under their promos tab in the app. There's conference tournaments that are there, which means all the biggest moments are there for you in college basketball, as well as the women's tournament and men's tournament that's going on right now. Prize Picks even offers injury insurance so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players get injured. That's really fantastic. They've got all sorts of stuff over here on Prize Picks, man. I don't know why I became Australian, but let me tell you, they got you covered. It's really a lot of fun, 2 to 6 players, and it's also fun just like posting your lineup. I've seen people do that a bunch, especially in the baseball community, the Prize Picks lineup, and it's always really fun to be like, oh, so you got the over on home runs, under on hits, and then W or more on strikeouts. It's fun. It's fun. It's really fun. I've had a lot of people tell me about it. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Remember, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB, $100 deposit match. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. And we're back, folks, here on the Locked On Padres podcast, going through the AJ Preller gambit. And as all those trades, with the exception of the Derek Norris and Craig Kimbrel trades, not quite as horrible, we got to talk about some of the good ones. Let's be a little bit positive here, guys. Let's be a little bit positive. All right. The next one that I want to talk about, which occurs basically around this time, is a small one. So while you have the Trey Turner one and the Yasmani Grandal one and what was the other one that I discussed was really bad? There's so many. And then the Max Fried giving up those players, they did do the James Shields trade. This one doesn't need to be talked about much. Arguably the second worst trade of the last decade plus. The only one that I think is worse is the Chris Archer trade that everyone still clowns the Pirates to this day. Because at least that one was, that one you could say we knew Archer wasn't good. At least with James Shields, he did have the narrative. He'd had the big game James thing. And he was a starting caliber pitcher that helped people win occasionally, right? At least you can argue that. And you didn't know what Fernando Tatis Jr. was going to be. Well, you had a little bit more info on the prospects the Pirates would get. Anyway, we're getting off track. You get Tatis and Eric Johnson. Banger of a trade. It is arguably the reason that AJ Preller, I wouldn't be surprised if I learned, which I haven't, that if Preller, if not for that trade, might have been fired. Not necessarily that year, but maybe if he's not known as the guy who found Tatis Jr., does he get fired maybe after 2021, after 2023? Maybe. I don't know. I'm just, again, we're venturing into what if territory. That's all I'm saying. Obviously a banger of a trade. Kudos to AJ Preller. The type of trade that will forgive a lot of bad ones. And I think because of the Tatis trade, on top of being just a great player, also being exciting, I think that one helped forgive the other trades of Trey Turner, of Yasmani Grandal, and Max Fried. Although I think the most defensible one is Wil Myers, by the way. We'll get into that a little bit later. But anyway, moving forward to some other trades that AJ Preller made. Moving down the timeline. The next big ones, look, the Tommy Pham trade. Heading into 2020, the Padres needed on-base stuff, so they traded for Tommy Pham, and they also acquired Jake Cronenworth, and they gave up Xavier Edwards and Hunter Renfroe and a player to be named later. Yeah, that one turned out pretty well. Hunter Renfroe is actually a decent depth piece, I think, but it far and away, this one goes to the Padres. This was almost a miss for AJ Preller, but Tommy Pham gets a little bit hurt and struggles with the Padres, but even still, adding at least, let's say, half a season for Tommy Pham, right? The half season you got in 2021 when he was good, you could argue, right? Like, he was really good in the first half of 2021, if I'm not mistaken. The first half, he had a 118 WRC plus, second half 80. Everyone on the Padres in 2021, the second half absolutely stunk, like just completely stunk, but that was pretty good. And then you get Jake Cronenworth, which I know that he's not in the good graces now, but at the time, remember, 4.2 F4 2 consecutive years at second base. That alone is amazing. Xavier Edwards has done nothing. Player to be named later has done nothing. And Hunter Renfroe has been bouncing from team to team. Would be useful potentially on this Padres team at times, but well worth it for Jake Cronenworth alone. So that was a really good trade. A really good trade for Preller. Not as much of an ultimate fleece, but still really good. Another trade that was made that we got to talk about is one that I think the jury is still... The jury debated over whether this one was good or bad for a while, and that is Mike Clevinger and outfielder Greg Allen and a player to be named later in exchange for a giant bulk package. Austin Hedges, Cal Quantrill, Gabriel Arias, Joey Cantillo, Owen Miller, and Josh Naylor. So this one's really complicated. I don't think Preller should be getting that much crap for this one, and I've seen him get crap for this one. Austin Hedges was a backup catcher who also was really bitter about the Hosmer thing. I was like, Austin Hedges, what? Why are you taking shots at the Padres? Like, who are you? We let you start like a bajillion games despite the fact that you couldn't hit the ball with a boat paddle. Like, what are we talking about here? And then, that's why they're struggling, because they lost Hosmer's leadership. Enough with that. Cal Quantrill, you might think, he was good at points. He's not that good of a pitcher. The 1 year he was good was very, very lucky. I believe it was 2022. It was really inflated by some luck with the defense. Like this guy had a 3.38 ERA, 4.39 FIP. Like, it wasn't bad, don't get me wrong. And in 2021, he was also pretty good too in 149 innings. But I think it was a little bit luck-based. But even still, bottom line is he would have been helpful in 2021, a pitcher like Quantrill, right? Like, that would have been helpful when they were suffering. I think he's better than like the Velasquez, the broken Lamet, and the Jake Arrieta. So that isn't great, although he's not incredible. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that he got killed last year, and then now he's on the Rockies, and he might get killed even more. Gabriel Reyes, not too much. Same thing for Kento and Owen Miller. And then Josh Naylor, who's an everyday solid at-bat, who I think the Padres have a lot of former first basemen that would be a lot better than their current first basemen, whether it be Hosmer or whether it be Cronenworth. Josh Naylor just hits. Guy had a 2.5 F4 last year, 128 WRC+. That's a loss. And he could play first base or the outfield. So that would be someone who could really help the Padres right now. So this one's a little bit of an L. However, Mike Clevinger got hurt. We're not going to talk about the off-field stuff, but Mike Clevinger got hurt. So that is like something that I don't necessarily put on Preller, but just this is what happens sometimes when you take a risk. The bad side of this trade is just that you gave up a lot of assets. But again, Mike Clevinger was good for a brief time before he got hurt, and they didn't know he was going to need Tommy John surgery, right? So if that doesn't happen, my thing is, if Mike Clevinger doesn't get hurt, I think this trade is viewed as pretty okay. The bad side of it for me isn't as much the players they gave up, but just the amount they gave up that you could have maybe put to use elsewhere. Maybe you could have used that trade for a different player that ends up not getting hurt. I don't know. So this one, in my opinion, is a little bit of a wash. Trevor Rosenthal, really quickly, W. I mean, really good for the Padres, helped them on their little run in 2020. Was also really funny on Twitter for Edward Olivares and a player to be named later. Solid closer. Awesome. Obviously wouldn't be the best closer that the Padres end up, acquiring, but even still, got to give a shout out to Trevor Rosenthal. But that's not it. That's not it, guys. That's not it. That's not it, ladies and gentlemen. We got to talk about as well some more W's and some more L's on this episode because believe me, we are not done. Let's keep it rolling with really some minor ones. Chris Paddock and Emilio Pagan in exchange for Taylor Rogers and Brent Rooker. Taylor Rogers was really important. I think this one is a W because at the time, Emilio Pagan is not any good. Like, he was really blowing a lot of games for the Padres, not very good. And Chris Paddock, I think he might be good this year. Keep an eye on that. It's just a sneaking suspicion, but ends up getting hurt for the whole season. So you literally gave up nothing in exchange for Brent Rooker, who you then flipped later on. Didn't end up using him. He goes to the A's. But Taylor Rogers was really good in that first half for the Padres until they got Hader. So basically, like, they got themselves a really good closer for a little bit. And then until they got Josh Hader. So not that bad considering that you were a team that was trying to win now. And you gave up basically nothing in Chris Paddock because he was hurt. But that one's a W right now, but could become an L very soon. So keep an eye on that one for sure. What else we got here? What's another small trade that he made? This lunatic. Brandon Drury. They gave up Victor Acosta. Brandon Drury wasn't very good for the Padres at all. It's really unfortunate. Did he overperform? Maybe. But I don't mind the decision at the time. They were going all in for it, but just not very good with the Padres, really. Yes, he had a 3 WAR in total, but when he got to the team, it was not great. He really wasn't hitting very well. He had a couple bombs. I think he had a home run that first day, but that was it. Not very good. Not very good at all. Not very good whatsoever, ladies and gentlemen. But ladies and gentlemen, we got some more trades to talk about. We got some big ones to talk about to conclude this podcast. This fun podcast of OGs and whatever you want to call it. What can I say? What can I say? It's just unbelievable that we're still not even close to done with all the mega trades that this man has made, including the Juan Soto trade, which we'll talk about in a second, guys. But before we do that, I want to take a second to talk about one of our sponsors. You heard him at the top of the show. That is Gametime. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the thing. Buying tickets can be frustrating, especially when it's last minute, but not with Gametime, because they've got flash last minute deals for you, all-in prices, views from your seat to make it easier, best prices guaranteed over at Gametime. It takes the guesswork out of buying tickets, you know what I mean? Last minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals. It's easy to find tickets for every kind of event, by the way. Not just baseball, but basketball, NBA, college, whatever, theater, comedy, like all sorts of stuff. They got you paying that for. So whatever you need a ticket for, Gametime has got you covered. You know what I mean? So go check them out. They're really fantastic when they give you all their zone deals and whatnot. They have the views from the seats alone is a great thing that they do. Love that. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed with Gametime. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. As I send one quick text message on here, the Locked On Padres podcast. Let's keep going because we got more trades to talk about. All right. After all of that, after that disastrous Mike Clevinger trade, well, what could we possibly do? What could we possibly do? Well, here comes the fun stuff. The offseason of all off seasons. One trade in which I was so close. We did like bold predictions here at Locked On, and we did like little videos for them. I was so dang close to saying my hot take would be that Joe Musgrove would be the best, or I think I said my hot take was that he would be the second best pitcher in the Padres rotation. He ended up being the best this year in 2021, but of course, Joe Musgrove, 3-team trade. They sent Joey Lucchesi to the Mets, a guy who certainly wore out his welcome with the Padres, wasn't very good, and at one point was like kind of their best starter, which just shows you how far they've come, by the way. As well as Omar Cruz, Hudson Head, and David Bednar to the Pirates. Now here's the thing. The Padres have had pretty good bullpen performance every year, but this is still a W for Preller. And look, not every trade has to be good only if you fleece the other team. Yeah, they gave up David Bednar, who's one of the best closers in baseball, especially these past 3 seasons, hasn't had an ERA above 2.61, gets good strikeouts, he's awesome. But I will gladly trade a great reliever for a great starting pitcher, and especially one that threw the first no-hitter in Padres history. So that's a W trade. And again, just because you ended up giving up something of value doesn't mean it's a bad trade. Like, it's still a W. Sometimes trades can be 1-for-1. Like, we got our stuff, not to mention team context and situations. Like, the Pirates are rebuilding. And a relief pitcher that's good, not necessarily what you want for a rebuilding team. Or at least not the ideal thing for a rebuilding team. If they still had Musgrove right now, like, is that better? Yeah, again, spending money is good, guys. Spending money is good, and it's bad when you don't. But two trades, at least in my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, are the Yu Darvish and Blake Snell trades. Blake Snell, arguably next to the Fernando Tatis Jr. trade, is the best trade that AJ Preller has made his entire tenure. Because Musgrove's great, but the reason why is because they basically gave up nothing. In the Snell trade, they gave up Luis Patino, who's one of their top prospects at the time, Cole Wilcox, and catchers Blake Hunt and Francisco Mejia. Shouts to the Mejia truthers out there. I was one of you, but Mejia doesn't do much. Blake Hunt doesn't do much. I still remember everyone trying to get excited about him because of some power potential. Nothing. Cole Wilcox, a guy who did have some hype because the Padres, like, they acquired him, and he at the time was described as a talent who might actually be first round, but people were a little bit worried about like some of the signing bonus stuff and some of the complications with the draft. I'm not going to get into that too much right now. And then Luis Patino was the prize of the deal, but in fairness to the Rays, just gets super hurt. The funniest part about this, he then gets claimed off of waivers by the Padres. So this one is a massive W. Even if you take out last year, there was still some really great stretches of Snell that would make it worth it. But then especially if you have last year, you got a Cy Young winner for basically nothing. So that is a massive W for AJ Preller and company. The next trade that's a W, in my opinion, is Yu Darvish. Remember that trade? That was a fun one. Look, this one was wild. It was Zach Davies, shortstop prospect Reginald Preciado, outfielder Ismail Mena, shortstop Jason Santana, and then lastly, unfortunately, outfielder Owen Casey, who, this one hurts a little bit, by Just Baseball. Of course, I'm biased, but Just Baseball has him as their number 29 prospect. He's a number 47 on MLB.com and number 65 on Baseball Prospectus. So, bottom line, you gave up a top 100 guy. But even still, and while Darvish has been a little bit Jekyll and Mr. Hyde over the course of his Padres tenure, even on the bad sides, he's a guy that can throw innings for you and be a quality starting pitcher. And then on the good side, he's been an ace quality guy. He was an ace quality guy for the first half of 2021, all of 2022, and that's it. So 2023 has been bad, or 2023 was bad, and then the second half of 2021 wasn't great. But even if you take that into account, this is a W trade for the Padres. It's not like they gave up anything crazy, right? So again, good stuff from our guy. Good stuff from our guy. Another trade that we got to talk about, of course, is Juan Soto. Juan Soto and Josh Bell in exchange for Luke Voit, Hosmer's last act of vengeance. For those who don't remember, he declined being traded to the Nationals, so they had to send Luke Voit instead. Grr! We loved Luke Voit that year. Robert Hassel, James Wood, Mackenzie Gore, CJ Abrams, and Jarlin Susana. Jarlin Susana and Luke Voit, you can write off. Luke Voit, fine player. We love him. I love the chugging of the water thing. That was a lot of fun. Robert Hassel. You Padres fans, you might be wondering, what happened to that guy? Wasn't he our top prospect? Fell off dramatically. The hype died out. He's not even on the top 100 anymore. So Preller sold high on Hassel, which was great. Unfortunately, though, Mackenzie Gore, he's like a Lucchese, like maybe he's just a back-end rotation guy. He had some moments. He's still super young, right? He's still only just 25, so maybe he improves. But if that was the only piece you gave up, that would have been fine. But you gave up CJ Abrams and James Wood. We could talk about this trade for years. I've been talking about this trade, honestly, for years already. CJ Abrams is going to be awesome. James Wood is a top 15, top 20 prospect that a lot of people are excited about, guy, and he hits the crap out of the ball and could be awesome, and he's an outfielder to which the Padres desperately need one. So, is this trade a W? I think on face value, yes, because you got one of the best bats of the generation in Juan Soto, even if it was for only a year and a half. Even if. But to me, it's tricky because you weren't able to keep him. And if you're giving up that many assets, you should have. And again, this has nothing to do with this trade in particular. I think it has to do with overestimating how much money you would have, maybe thinking you would make the playoffs and get the playoff revenue money from TV deals. But going out and doing everything except extending him was a bit of a problem. That's what ended up happening, right? And that's really unfortunate, but it do be true. ladies and gentlemen. It do be true. So that one is, I'll leave that up to you guys. If you want to leave a comment, is that a W or an L? I think it's like mostly an L, mostly only because you didn't sign him. So it depends. If you want to view it in the grand context, it's an L. But if you want to view it in just in the moment, not as bad, because you still got the player of the generation and you sold high on 2 of the prospects you gave up, Gore and Hassel. So that one's tough though. That one's tough. That one's really hard. So I'm going to say an L for now. And that's basically it. That's basically it, ladies and gentlemen. I've talked about basically every trade that the Padres have made, and now we have Dylan Cease. And we have to see how that one pans out. Let me make sure I didn't forget any. Oh, we forgot one last one. I'm sorry, guys. One last L. This one is an L. Sorry to break the tension, but it is arguably the worst trade, arguably. And I'm going to tell you why. It is Austin Nola, Austin Adams, and Dan Altavilla in exchange for Taylor Trammell, who at the time was the biggest part of the deal, Ty France, Luis Torrens, who's now with the Yankees, and Andres Muniz. Here's why I'm going to tell you why this is the worst one for me. Austin Nola had only started becoming a catcher who could hit a little bit that year in 2020. So you bought high on a catcher in a shortened season. You could make the argument, hey, this is never going to happen again. Let's just go for it. Like, anyone can win this year because it's 2020 and was weird and shortened season. You want to argue that? Fine. But you gave up Ty France, who, yes, you could also argue, maybe wasn't going to play because of Hosmer. But Ty France ended up being really great. You could have used that resource elsewhere. And Andres Muniz is now the closer for the Mariners, I'm pretty sure. And he's awesome. He's a very good pitcher. He's nasty. So this one's an L. And especially because if you got, let's say this was the deal for, I don't know, the Pham Cronenworth thing. I would argue like, all right, Cronenworth's fine, even if you gave up some good players. But this one's bad because even at the time, I didn't like it. And that's my thing. If we go through every trade that AJ Preller has done, I've actually been marking them down for like L and W, right? We've got I should have done this beforehand. We've got 1, 2, 3 L's in terms of like that 2015 disaster class. So 1, 2, so it's 3 L's compared to, it's very 50-50, but I think it's about like a 60-40 in favor of AJ Preller, basically. I don't really have it in front of me because I decided that the Clevinger one was a wash. Drury was whatever. And then Pham and Cronenworth, that was good. So I think the majority of Preller's thing has been great. And I think most importantly, in terms of what you can take away from this episode today that has something to do with the rest of the Padres, going forward, almost all of AJ Preller's trades look great initially. That's not been the problem. The only one that I didn't like immediately was Nola. And by the way, I was on that one. And not because I thought Ty France and Andres Muniz would be amazing. I just didn't like how many assets they gave up for a guy who only started to hit that year. Like, you were buying high in a shortened season. And my thing was, I just don't think we needed to do that. And he also wasn't all that amazing for the Pods. He was okay. He had his moments, actually, when he was like just an on-base batting average guy, which is huge for catchers. You don't need to hit for power. But even still, my thought was like, it's a little bit of a no-name per se. For the Padres to be trading for. Now, not to toot my horn so much, because I loved the Trey Turner, Wil Myers trade. My thing was rookie of the year player. He's going to be in the outfield. Finally, we got someone good. He was rookie of the year with the Tampa Bay Rays. He could be great. That one was an L on my part, right? Like, that one's an L. But that's my thing, is I personally think that all these trades look good initially. So keep that in mind when we're thinking about Dylan Cease. And then number 2, I personally think it's the signings that have been more disastrous, because trades can sometimes be fluky, as evidenced by the Mike Clevinger injury. Heck, as evidenced by the Luis Patino getting killed with injury luck, right? That thing can be those can be a little bit more luck based, and I think he deserves credit for being willing to make the moves in the first place. And I think he deserves more flack for signings, because again, the Juan Soto deal, which we alluded to, I think that there's a world in which if you don't sign big on Bogarts, if you don't extend Manny, and certainly if you don't extend Darvish and Cronenworth, maybe you have options and you're able to keep Juan Soto for this last year and maybe in hopes of extending him. I understand he wanted a lot of money. I get that. We'll have to see, right? Like, let's say this offseason comes by and the guy gets $600 million. Then it's like, okay, maybe we wouldn't have been able to do that. But even still, that's my way of thinking. I think the signings and the lack of foresight into what might become available has been my bigger problem. But all in all, the guy is wheeling and dealing constantly, and I think he's had more W's than not. So I think that we need to remember that. For me, it's the signings and all those reports we get about being a micromanager, which is why Preller is a problem and why I personally was on the side of getting a new GM this past offseason. I was. After the season ended, I thought they needed a new change in direction, but that's not happening anytime soon, clearly. So again, let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of all the trades, whether or not he had more W's than L's and vice versa. But that's just me. And we're going to see if Dylan Cease was a W. We're going to see if this whole roster was a W this upcoming season. Starting tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. That about does it for today's edition of Locked On Padres podcast. The only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Tomorrow's episode, crossover preview for this series between the Giants and Padres with myself and Ben Kaspic. That'll be a lot of fun. And then Friday we'll be doing some recapping and such. And remember, follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO, or at LO_Padres, or Locked On Padres on YouTube. Send me your questions, leave comments to be featured in the Monday mailbag. Until next time, stay safe, and of course, stay faithful. My very faithful homies, take care.